What's going on, GBA fans? My name is Burke, and today we bring you the Week 5 Power Rankings, but unfortunately, I'm with someone right now, so you can introduce yourself.
We're dating? Oh my god, you should have told me. Get it? I'm with someone right now? Okay. Hey guys, Travis here, again, for another week of Power Rankings.
Why do I do this with you?
Because no one else wanted to.
That's true. So, at number 16, we have the Newcastle United. Now, Sam didn't upload his battle, so we don't really have too much to say about him this week. But from what I could see, a lot of his mons, it was just really passive again. Not really too much offense going forward. I mean, he did a Kyurem and a Dragonite, but he let Kyurem go down really early. So, it wasn't too much that he could put offensive pressure on his opponent just as well. A lot of his mons just seemed to be free switch-ins, so like anytime Klefki came in, the Steelix came in, and he was able to wear down the Steelix early game and then let it get back over half throughout the battle. Just as well, like Suicune comes in, Tornadus comes in, and then Suicune can't touch Tornadus and is always forced out. So when you have that kind of passive play, a lot of your opponent's mons are free switch-ins, and even if they don't have active recovery or reliable recovery, like, you know, Recover or, you know, Soft Boiled, they can still get back up in decent HP due to leftovers, which we saw with the Blastoise, which we saw with the Steelix. So, you know, it was a problem we've seen in past weeks with this kind of passive play, and wasn't able to really get a foothold in the match. Yeah, the crit at the end sucked. Maybe he could have gotten like a 5-0 instead of being 6-0'd, but at that point, you know, it wasn't really much he could do. Just as well, you know, the time was running out. It was a very long, drawn-out battle due to how defensive both teams were, and it's just, you know, that kind of happens when you play very passively. You can't really kill your opponent's mons, what you're supposed to do.
Sam didn't get any momentum this week. It was Chimp pretty much stayed in control the whole game, and Sam, yeah, used his walls way too passively, like you said, and there was no obvious win condition, which is hard to know because he didn't upload his battle, so like we don't know what he was planning to win. Things like the Suicune never tried to set up because he knew that Tornadus would go with Grass Knot, and you said that Blastoise and Steelix are able to get up to good health with lefties. Well, Sam let his walls get their lefties knocked off really early, which is mostly good prep on Chimp's part, but it means that your Klefki is going to keep getting worn down, and Chimp has no reason not to go for Grass Knot on the switch-in, even if it only does like 1%, because that Klefki was getting worn down, whereas Chimp's walls managed to stay healthy because he preserved their leftovers, and he didn't let them get too worn down by things like hazards.
So at number 15, we have the San Jose Sharpedos. I'm not really going to talk too much about like the battle itself because I don't think Tom played poorly. But this is the kind of battle that happens when you plan really poorly. You look at John's team, you look at Tom's team, and John has a really fat team. He's got, you know, Miltank, he's got Escavalier, he's got Reuniclus, Gastrodon. You know, he's got all this really, really fat bulk, and you look at Tom's team and there's no wall breakers. And it's just kind of a problem for Tom's team in general. If you see your opponent has like this really bulky bulk team, you gotta bring the wall breakers. And he didn't. He brought sweepers, pivots, and walls with no heal bell, no hazard removal, and no hazards himself. So that's not going to work out well. And he didn't bring a defogger because he planned on Miltank not coming and then rocks not being set up because he's taunt on a lot of things. That's not really something you can plan for because you can't possibly always be perfect with your prediction of the taunt. Tom just kind of had to let his team get whittled down very slowly, and then once the first bond died, that was it. It was basically on his way to a 6-0 anyway. So
this game did demonstrate why I had Tom's team ranked pretty low in the post-draft power rankings. I wouldn't say complete lack of power, because he has some power, but Mega Aerodactyl is more of a late-game sweeper. Big thing is, Tom has possibly the best hazard removal in the league. He brought none of it, which meant rocks that came up and rocks stayed up because he didn't predict Miltank, and that's something that you went over, and something that I see again and again with Tom's prep is that he brings a set that deals really, really well, like it'll perfectly counter one mon. And then if that's not brought and something else is brought, he has nothing for it because he tries too hard to predict what his opponent's going to bring. And in general, you want to build a team that can deal with anything no matter what they throw at you. I don't think Tom even has that in his mindset. I'm not saying you can do it every week, but I'm saying you need to at least be thinking about it. Okay. I like the fact that at the end of the video, he is still keeping his head up despite the fact that he got 6-0'd, and he notices something needs to change, he notices what his problem is, and is making efforts to change that, which I really, really like. I mean, you can say a lot of things about Tom, but generally his attitude towards his own playing is pretty good.
So, at number 14, we have the New York Metapods, so why don't you take Dan?
Dan built a much more offensive team this week. It was still balanced, so it had, a decent amount of bulk, but I liked these offensive options a bit more. Scarf, Flygon plus Life Orb Medicham was actually able to deal with Nick's team relatively well if they were used in the right way. He didn't want Kyurem to get up a sub, but the thing is, even if it had gotten up a sub, he could have played around it, and after he saw the Life Orb, I mean, sub Life Orb is possible, but it's not the smartest thing to bring, particularly on a mon that's weak to rocks, particularly when the Skarmory that was brought wasn't mainly meant to be a defogger, it was sort of meant to be a suicide-y kind of set, get Tailwind up and then click Brave Bird a couple of times. The other thing is, I think Dan overestimated Special Kyurem. Now, this is going to sound weird because Kyurem Black is one of the best wall breakers in the format, but the thing is, if it's fully especially offensive, it only has base 120 special attack, which is less than the likes of Thundurus Incarnate, Latios, Alakazam, Gengar, lots of other things which people wouldn't be as terrified of, and its coverage isn't fantastic. It's not terrible, but it's not amazingly good coverage. So I think he's slightly overestimated how powerful Kyurem is, and could have predicted a bit more around it, instead of, for example, sacking his Victini, which could have been really useful later in the game. The main problem with Dan is he didn't recognize his win condition. He thought it was Flygon, but in my opinion, it was Medicham, because towards the end of that game, Medicham with Bullet Punch could have taken out Kyurem. I haven't done the exact calcs, but Fake Out plus Bullet Punch definitely would have taken out with the Life Orb recoil, and after a little while, Bullet Punch definitely would have been able to deal with Kyurem, and it could have outsped and killed the Mega Venusaur, whereas Flygon couldn't do enough damage to Mega Venusaur. So I think late game he was preserving Flygon really well, but it was the wrong thing to preserve.
When it came to the late game, I don't think Dan wanted to make the offensive switches. Like, Darmanitan comes in, you can bring in the Flygon. Listen, I know the Flygon wasn't defensive, but it can take a Flare Blitz, outspeed because of the Scarf, and you can get some hits off. But or you turn on out into something else. But he was really adamant about, I gotta make sure that the Flygon takes no damage. It didn't matter what health the Flygon was out, it outsped everything else. It would have outsped and killed the Darm, outsped and killed the Kyurem. You can switch it into a Flare Blitz. It's fine. It's seeing things offensively that I don't think Dan does very well. He likes to check things defensively and then make offensive switches, but not bring in something that, yeah, it'll take a lot of damage, but will then be able to force something out. And I don't think he did that very well this game. Aside from that, yeah, I mean, he played well throughout the match, but at the end, when he sacked off the Medicham, it was basically game, because Mega Venusaur is so damn fat, it is going to soak up any hit you throw at it that's not a super effective move that's also stab. So, and Flygon is weak. I'm sorry, Flygon fans. Stab Outrage should do more, but it doesn't, So at number 13, we have the Milwaukee Sawsbucks, and Battler X actually won. Like, that's
his first win in League format.
Yeah, that's his first win ever. Maybe the curse that was on the franchise since Week 1, Season 1 has finally been lifted, and now he's going to go on an 8-game win streak. It was really top prep this week. The sub spam really worked, and he used it well throughout the match because, he goes for sub on Heatran, and then he goes for sub on Gengar, and then Gio's like, well, he probably doesn't have sub on Meloetta also. I mean, come on. How many mons is he going to have sub on? And then Meloetta goes for sub, and he's like, well, shit, it also has Substitute. So, really good, making sure that a move like Substitute, which isn't really, a very crazy move to have, caught the opponent off guard because you have so many substitute mons. Him Power Ground and Heatran was great. He really thought out his sets this week. He made sure that Ditto wasn't ever going to have a free switch in, either through using substitute or having hidden powers that the Ditto wouldn't actually have. Throughout this game, he actually made really aggressive plays, but they weren't very risky aggressive plays. Like, he almost, with the Nidoking, he didn't really need Heatran at that point, and he could sack it off, so he made the aggressive play hoping that Geo would overpredict, and actually worked out for him. So that mid-game aggression actually worked out, and he used Cress as a way to continually bring in Heatran and then stall out Cress, which, if you can outstall Cresselia, then that's just disgusting. He made sure the Cresselia didn't actually die also, because then he knew, well, I can bring in Meloetta and basically just set up a sub for free, and then start setting Calm Minds in its face, because Cresselia can't do anything. And once that happened, you know, he recognized his win condition was the Meloetta, and he used the Meloetta as his win condition, set up with it, and just kind of clean up the game. And I hope to continue seeing this. I mean, we've seen him prep well in the past. He is inconsistent, and I want to see that he can actually be a consistent planner and player throughout the rest of the season.
I've never seen prep for Ditto that was that good and that in-depth on every single mon. Really, really well thought out, and that was impressive. I really like the balance between the slightly gimmicky things and the more standard sets, which was much more effective this week than the full-on gimmicks of last week, of the past couple of weeks. And one thing he did well was not just going, alright, this thing's done its job, I'm going to sack it off. Instead of just straight up sacking them off, going, okay, I don't really need them, so I can afford to be a bit risky with them, with things like the Heatran, and it pays off for him. Preserving PP on things like the Magma Storm was actually pretty smart. When Geo finally switched, he was able to go for Magma Storm, and that was really efficient use of his moves. The only other thing I have to say is that I really like the fact that he takes his only opportunity to talk some massive shit and just spend the last 10 minutes of a video just talking shit to people, because you're not going to get that opportunity again.
Oh,
Calling it.
Calling out. God damn. So at number 12, we have the Utah Jasmine. So why don't you take Cooper?
Cooper basically played pretty well right up until the last few turns of the game. He got damage on things he needed, had a couple of those gimmicky Cooper checks that he has for things, Arcogen and Polyon, stuff like that. It was cool to see, even though it got burned. I don't particularly agree with letting a Staraptor take a burn turn 1, because Staraptor is still just powerful, but I do like the fact that he then preserved it after that, knowing it could still do huge damage because it's a Staraptor. And the speed creeping on the Choice Scarf Staraptor was really good, allowing him to run a lot of HP investment, which you need when you're going for recoil moves. But the main thing that I want to talk about with Cooper is the fact that he made this full flowchart on screen and talked for ages about every possible move that either team could go for, and so what his best move was to win. Except he didn't consider every possible move. He was assuming both teams had to stay in, whereas Gliscor beats Excadrill one-on-one from almost no health, so instead of relying on Water Shuriken to take out Excadrill, he could have just preserved the Gliscor. And so late game, when there's a Pidgeot that he thinks might die to poison, but he's not sure, you can switch in Greninja. If he roosts, you outspeed next turn and kill it with an Ice Beam. If Excadrill takes Ice Beam damage, doesn't matter, you can switch straight back into Gliscor. You win if both teams are switching. If he goes for Hurricane, you lose Greninja, that's fine, and then he dies to poison. Particularly the first time, it would have been a bit iffy, but definitely the second time when you knew he was taking about 40% from poison and it was under half, sacking Greninja was the play to win, and I don't think Cooper considered sacking a Mon as an option late game.
It's those kind of plays where I think he thinks them out a little bit too much. He's really thinking it out, but he's not looking at just what is the smartest play to go for. Like, there's Pidgeot in front of you, you've got a Greninja in the back that's not doing too much. It's either going to die, or it's going to kill the Pidgeot, and that's about it, because you don't want to have to rely on rolls to kill the Excadrill with Water Shuriken, because that's really unreliable. Like, if there was Sandrill, Water Shuriken on the Greninja, I'm not saying that was bad prep, I'm just saying, at the end, because it had so much HP left, that Water Shuriken was just, it wasn't the best play. Aside from that, like, during the game, he plays very safely around Excadrill throughout the match, constantly worried about it coming in on the Clefable. Yeah, every time it's Clefable, he went for Flamethrower, not like Psyshock or anything like that, because he didn't want Excadrill to get a free switch in, which I understand why you don't want to give Excadrill a free switch in, but then again, at the same time, you've got something like a Gliscor that can, in fact, deal with it decently well. But overall, he played well. I think he needs to take a step back during those late game plays and look at what are literally every play I can do aside from just staying in. So at number 11, I have the Real Marill, and this week it was much better prep. You know, he built his own team, so that's very good. He came up with a pretty interesting set this week, and that was that Natural Gift Wapmelberry for the Mega Scizor, which did not work. And overall, like, this match, he didn't play poorly, but the thing is, with, like, the Wapmelberry, he was so confident in his ability to win that 50-50 that he didn't think about anything else. He had switch-ins to Mega Scizor. He wanted Fizz to over-predict and make the bad play instead of Miguel having to make the good play. While the Natural Gift Wapmelberry is cool, and it would have killed the Scizor had it worked, the problem is that relies on Fizz making the bad play, and not just, well, I can switch into Talonflame on a Bullet Punch, a U-turn. He's got to make the middle ground plays instead of trying to do this really high-risk, high-reward plays. He played well. He did play well, I'm not saying, and he planned well, but there's some gimmicks that just generally don't work. I think he put too much emphasis on that to try to bring down the Mega Scizor, and then, you know, he just couldn't deal with the Porygon too very well because he didn't have anything to reliably take it down, because, you know, he couldn't knock off its Eviolite because he didn't have Weavile anymore. It's that kind of playing that I see, that he's got to start making these much more middle ground plays instead of making very high-risk plays. That's going to really bite him in the ass.
I mean, and the whole point of Natural Gift was he kept saying, and his team prep was to bait the Rhyperior and bait the Mega Scizor, then Hazard Stack, sweep with Talonflame. He baited Rhyperior well, brought grass coverage on everything so they could deal with it, popped the Rindo, got it down to really low health, was able to then get rid of rocks and kill Rhyperior, and managed to, I mean, he didn't really manage to bait the Scizor, and he never really managed to Hazard Stack, which are the other two things of that plan which he needed to go well. Now, if you wanted to bait Scizor, bring Overheat Primate. That's mostly there because if anyone watches Done Deal, you would know that he faced an Overheat Primate on low ladder OU. Anyway.
I don't even know if Primate got Overheat.
It does, and it does like a solid 60% to Mega Scizor. It's impressive. He had a couple of mental blanks in a row. He saw Scizor coming in and went, I'm going straight with Fire Blast, and clicked it, and then after he clicked it, he went, why would Fizz bring in Scizor? And I think that's when he started to realise that maybe this was a Zoroark and got caught a bit off guard by it. But the big thing was after that, he forgot about Gooey, let his Goodra die because Zoroark was forced to go for Sucker Punch. Honestly, I think if Miguel has time and if he really wants to win this season, he could do some practice, just like normal showdown battling like he used to, just to get himself used to noticing those types of things again and identifying his win condition, identifying how he can execute his plan, because that's what's been lacking this season compared to previous seasons.
Alright, so at number 10, we have the Borussia Donphan. Talk about Lars.
So, we're going to get like 50 million comments saying Landorus Incarnate should be banned. The coaches, they decide whether or not things get banned, and a majority of them voted to allow it, so they have to deal with playing against it. Honestly, watching his team builder was fantastic, because he mentions that MV has in the past brought a lot of heat sets, as you know, people keep calling them or whatever. And
as the kids call
as the kids, I used to call them gimmicks back in my day. But anyway, he also scouted out how MV likes to play. He likes to make aggressive switches, aggressive predictions, and brings hyper offensive setup teams. He identified both those things, prepped for it in his team, and then played. Which is the big thing: is he played knowing MV would play aggressively, and that got him so much momentum. If he can continue to do that, it could play in his favour so much against so many teams, because a lot of people bring similar playstyle and similar team concept of how they're going to try and build. He was also really, really, really well prepared for Wobbuffet. There are a couple of things, the things that Wobbuffet would like to trap and kill, that were prepared to take it on really well. The main thing I'm going to say about his playing is he did really well predicting MV to be aggressive and playing safe. Like early on with the Ampharos against the Landorus, he said he was considering going for Sludge Wave predicting Togekiss, and then sat down and told himself, no, I can't afford to risk my Landorus. If he goes out to Togekiss, I can deal with it. And then he went a little bit too aggressive because he didn't run his calcs. And he later on ran a calc and realised that Life Orb Sneasel actually is still OHKO'd through Yachi Berry, and even an Adamant Scarf one had a chance to kill. So that mistake kind of helped him in the long run, but I think that you need to run your calcs more often just in case you don't notice something like that next time.
Lars, do your calcs. And I don't think you do realize that you're bringing all special attackers, Lars. I don't think you pointed that out enough in your team builder. Do you realize?
On that, though, I like the fact that he listened to us and noticed that we said that and then was like, no, I'm doing it for a reason.
It was pretty standard planning this week. Opponent has to bring the really catch you off guard kind of sets because you already have the team matchup. You just have to do things with the mons you already have. I love how he was so wary about giving Haxorus a free switch in. He always said, I can't go for Thunderbolt. I can't. Because if I go for Thunderbolt, I kill the Togekiss, Haxorus comes in, and that's going to be a bad time for me. So I'm going to continually Volt Switch to get something in that can kill the Haxorus so it never gets a free switch in. That was great. Played safe with the Lando in the beginning, as he should. It wins him the game. He can't play risky within the beginning. And yeah, do your calcs. At my number 9 and your number 8, we have the New Orleans Pelipers. John brought the bulk this week, and I don't really think John played super well this week. He didn't have to. He had the bulk. He realized Tom's lack of wall breakers, especially at team matchup, and he was just able to play to that. When you've got something like Miltank, Reuniclus, Gastrodon, and Escavalier, and your opponent has no wall breakers, you can just kind of switch between them and let your opponent get worn down. I don't really have too much to say about John, because he planned very well, and he played to what his opponent's team was this week, and he planned to what he thought that Tom was going to bring in this kind of more pivoty, sweepery team and not very much wall breakers. He knew that Tom can break through it. He played for the differential, which I know people keep saying, differential is such a stupid thing. I don't care, alright? It's important in this league. They're going to have to play for it sometimes. And it was never this really offensive playing. It was just keep his walls healthy, wear down Tom's team, and eventually push past the Mega Lopunny when I get a free switch in. This is the kind of playing that we're used to seeing from John, and it really worked for him. And if he can keep up this kind of playing to your opponent, this really good planning that we're used to seeing him plan, and I think he's going to really turn the season around and get it back on track.
He did make some, I wouldn't say they were aggressive plays, but forethought plays. So he made one prediction where he goes, I don't think Sylveon's going to go for Hyper Voices in with his Reuniclus, which could possibly take on anyway if it wasn't Specs, to scout for the HP Fire, which is really good, and that paid off because then seeing Tom switch out, he goes, it's probably choiced, and now knows the next time he goes for Hyper Voice, he can bring in a Scavalier and that kind of thing. That allowed him to get up a little bit of momentum, as well as a little bit of information about Tom's team for the late game. And the other thing he did really well was notice when he can recover up with particular mons. So knowing that if he brings Miltank in against this thing, I can Milk Drink for free, or I can get a Heal Bell off for free, and the same thing with the Gastrodon, because both of them got worn down at various times, but he was able to bring them back up to health against things where they had the matchup and forced a switch. And that's how you need to keep your walls healthy, because you can't sit there and spam recover against something that's doing 49% to you every time and slowly but surely get your health back, because eventually they'll make a switch, or eventually they'll get a crit, or eventually they'll set up or something, and then you're in trouble. But being able to do it against something which you know categorically has to switch out against you means you can get off that free recover, and that was really good.
Alright, so at my number 8 and your number 9, we have the Philadelphia Scissors, so why don't you talk about Chimp?
The main thing I liked about Chimp is he is, in my opinion, the best in the league at completely changing his playstyle. Because last week, he looked at the team matchup and said, I need to bring Hyper Offense. This week, he looks at the team matchup and says, I'm going to bring Semi-Stall, Hazard Shuffle, it was get chip damage. I haven't seen a single other coach this season go completely 180 in the space of a week. If he's able to do that continuously, it'll catch people off guard. No matter what he tries to do, it's more difficult to predict, and it makes his team more versatile. A lot of his sets were just efficiently built. I like the fact that he notices how calcs actually work, which a lot of people just sort of use the calculator in prep to look at if they can avoid getting 2-hit KO'd by particular moves or build for a 2-hit KO on particular things, but he knows that depending on what he invests in and then how much investment he needs to be like as efficient as possible. So all of his EVs were there for a reason. There was very rarely just like 4 EVs because I can, because they don't fit anywhere else. Sam didn't really ever get a foothold in this game. Chimp just kind of kept whittling things down, got up rocks, went for raw when he needed to, was able to just keep his walls around with nothing but leftovers, which is really impressive because he knew there were free switches into particular mons. And knowing that something like Klefki is not going to be running any coverage moves for Steelix because it has to have certain other moves and it has to have Flash Cannon for Diancie, he was able to scout those out pretty well and then just go, Steelix is completely free switching, I can force it out, I can get leftovers back, I can start roaring, setting up rocks, etc. And he basically just won the game off chip damage.
Yeah, no, I really like that he can just change his playstyle. That makes planning for him so much harder week to week. He planned for a slow match, and he had Diancie for offense, and that was pretty much it. But he didn't really need much. He knew that he could hazard stack and then phase, which, you know, he has roar on several mons. He's got spikes and rocks and everything like that. And he made sure to set them up whenever he could. So, again, I know people don't like differential, but I'm glad he recognized he could play for it this match when he had it locked up at the end. There's no reason for him to sack something off because he didn't need to. He could just try to get the 6-0, and granted the crit helped him, but you can play for differential. I will never say if it's risky, you should still play for differential. If you feel like you can lose because you decide to switch something out that you know you really shouldn't, then don't. But in this league, it does count for something, and you do want to play for it when you are absolutely certain you have the match on lock, and he did, and I like how he recognized that, and he played for it. So at number 7, we have the San Francisco Giants, and Gio, you could tell he was rushed this week. I mean, his sets were cool, some of them. Cress just, while it can be good, and he's used it well, this is the week where it definitely shows it can be setup fodder. Like, I like the Psycho Shift, and that's the kind of thing that you have to be able to do, is take a really passive wall and make it unpassive. And he didn't do that this week. Cresselia was a very passive wall and stayed passive because Heatran what do you do to Heatran? Literally nothing. 3 Scarfers this week might have been a little bit of an overkill on the Scarfers. I don't think you need 3. Like, dual Scarfers is usually generally good enough, but you know. So it was just, it was that kind of stuff that just, to me, it seemed like, yeah, the planning was rushed. It just wasn't as I had seen it in the first 3 weeks. There was no point in this match that I thought Gio was out of it, but it was the fact that Cresselia was such a big momentum killer this battle. Every time he switched in, he just, there goes all offensive momentum. He's lost it because Battler X can bring in whatever he wants on it because it's not killing anything. It might get a toxic off, but that's about it. It's good that he's going to try to learn from this loss. Like, I know it sucks to lose, and he was really salty about it at the end, but you got to learn from the loss and move on because he's in such a better position this season than he's been in any of the past seasons, and he's got to use that to make sure he gets into the playoffs. He's got to try to bring this season back on track. He's going to be less rushed for time, it seems. Don't just let Cresselia be just this big setup fodder, even though I hate Cresselia, and I hope it dies every match.
So I wouldn't be too harsh on yourself, Gio. I mean, obviously you need to be critical to see what you can improve on, but I wouldn't say, oh my god, I'm terrible, I lost to Battler X, because he played well. That happens. I mean, you pretty much covered why I hate Cress in the format, because you need to run coverage moves for things, and sometimes it's not powerful enough. In particular, I mean, the Heatran and the Meloetta could both just completely shut it down, and that's a problem. The main thing is, you said, like, 3 Scarfers may have been too much. In particular, when 2 of them get walled, depending on what move they go for, those are your checks to get rid of the things that they are walled by, if that makes sense. So, like, Nidoking can't go for Sludge Wave safely until the Heatran is down, but then it's his main way of killing Heatran with Earth Power. His other way of killing Heatran is a Scarfed Entei with Bulldoze, but it can't go for Sacred Fire until Entei is down, until Heatran is down, sorry. And if it goes for Bulldoze, Gengar gets a free switch, etc. That's part of a good team build on Battler X's part, and a decently built draft. But the other problem is, if you're going to Scarf something like that, it means you literally can't touch one of the mons you could then get rid of. and it just means you're forced to make predictions a lot more. You predicted against the Heatran and it cost you. I think not having that speed and that immediate power put Gio on the back foot because he had to save it for the late game, meaning he had to keep bringing in Cress, which killed all of his momentum, and allowed Steve to sort of get on top allowed Battler X to get on top in that game.
I don't know why I keep saying Steve. They're very different people.
I spent a little while in call with Steve the other day, and his name's in my head. It's just...
It's Battler X, come on. They're not even... They don't even look similar. They're not... Yeah, I don't get it. So, at number 6, we have the Pittsburgh Piratas. However the fuck you pronounce it. Talk about top.
I think that not bringing Sand was the right choice because Sand actually did more to Tup's team than it did to Koops, and Sandrush Excadrill can't do anything until Gliscor is dead, so you might as well just bring Scarf, which he did. One thing I didn't really understand is in his team builder video, he's going over all the things that he needs Tangrowth the wall, and there's all these special attackers that he wants them to take a hit from, and then he's got a fully physically defensive Tangrowth. Albeit with an Assault Vest, but Tangrowth's Bidef is really underwhelming, and the specially defensive Assault Vest set is the most common set brought. He never really described what that defensive investment was for. I think it would have been much more useful as at least much more specially defensive mon. You could still run mixed defense. I really liked how Tup played this match. There was nothing like the last week where he just bluffed the hell out of a Choice Scarf, but he managed to preserve his offensive threats, his fast offensive threats for the late game, so he ended up with just Pidgeot and Excadrill left, which meant that his team could outspeed Coop's team and could do big damage, and that's what he needed to do to win that game, with preserve those fast offensive things for when they could clean up. But really, it all came down to that end game where it's just mind games of who's going to go for what move, am I going to Roost, is he going to Protect, am I going to Hurricane, is he going to Switch, etc. And it wasn't even 50-50s because it was like 20% chance of a whole bunch of different things happening, and Tup came out on top.
Tup, he played well. I really like the Specs Tentacruel. It's interesting. Hits really hard, surprisingly. And one thing you didn't mention with the Scarf Drill, it also hits Wheezing for super effective damage. So normally Wheezing could just switch in on Sandrill, but now it can't. So I feel like he could have played a little bit more aggressively at the end to secure himself the win. The Tentacruel was so important. Tentacruel is just so important at the end because Tentacruel takes a hit from Greninja and can pretty much kill it with Sludge Bomb. It outspeeds the Gliscor and then kills with Scald. I feel like he needed the Tentacruel more than the Excadrill, but he didn't know that the Greninja didn't have extra sensory, so can't really prepare for that. But, you know, Tentacruel is very, very specially bulky, so. But with every match, it seems Tup keeps on improving, and he did well to plan for the late game. And granted, it still could have gone either way, but this was just a really good match, so really good matches usually can go either way towards the end. It's just whoever comes out on top in the mind games. He's on top of his division, so he's got to be doing a lot of things right for that to happen, and we'll see how far it can go this season. I feel like if he keeps playing this well and, you know, fixes up a little bit of the problems in planning, he's going to make the playoffs. At number 5, and your number 4, I have the Tampa Bay Lose Weights. So, Mono, yeah, you need to look into maximizing your EV spreads. Like, if you're going mixed defenses, you put the plus nature on the higher defense stat. Get more of that 10%. I'm not a huge fan of Paratrap Azu, like, especially against George, because you look at just regular Zoomerl, and it can just punch holes. And I realized he didn't want to give George free switch-ins, but still, you look at the overall team structure that Mono brought, it was really passive. This is different than what we've seen in past weeks. He brings, yes, a lot of defense, but he brings also a comparable amount of offense to pair up with it. And this week it was just, he had 4 defensive Mons, and then 2 offensive, one being his win condition sweeper at the end. If he lost either one of them, then he's putting all the pressure on taking down George's team on one of those Mons, and that's very hard to do. I did actually really like the Sub-Sal Chomp. That's really good. It could have actually swept the end had, you know, George knock on for Explosion, but, you know. And despite having his Bronzong cripple this match, he used it well to prevent momentum loss. which is actually really impressive. While the assumption about the fortress makes some sense, it could have also been to preserve the Fori and then explode at a later time. And he's always trying to find a time to set up with Garchomp. You know, he's always wary that Garchomp is my win condition. I need to set up with it. When can I set up with it? And, you know, he tried a little bit too early, and then he tried again, and he's like, this time, it's the right time. But unfortunately, you know, Fortress explodes. Fernape is banded. But overall, I think Mono played very well, despite having a different team structure and a very passive team this week. Despite the 4-0, the score did not at all dictate how good the match was and how close it was, because had George not gone for the explosion, Mono probably would have just won the game at that point, because Salic, Garchomp probably would have just outsped and killed everything. And also, I agree, Lantern is really underwhelming, and I would replace it, because I've used it, and it just doesn't do much.
If you're bringing a substitute berry set, you need your HP number to be divisible by 4, because otherwise you get 3 substitutes and the berry doesn't pop. You need to get down to exactly 25%, which is a number divisible by 4. The Perish Trap Azumarill set wasn't the right set. He was worried about bringing Banded, because if he went for Waterfall, then Milotic comes in. If he went for Play Rough, then Fortress comes in the next turn. But maybe not bringing Banded, but you could bring Life Orb, or Expert Belt, or Pixie Plate, or whatever, to give it a bit of an attack boost without it being locked into something, and it still could have done big damage. In particular, that Priority Aqua Jet would have been really nice. Even despite all of that, and despite letting his Bronzong get tricked, which is good prep on George's part, he managed to almost win that game, and, you know, it was a matter of George had just the right thing, because it wasn't just the fact that Explosion was on Fortress, it was also the fact that Infernape had to be choice banded adamant to kill off Garchomp at that point, because Garchomp still has ridiculous bulk.
Number 4, my number 4, your number 5, Boston Red Sox. So talk about Nick a little bit.
Main problem with Nick is that quite early on in his video, he mentions, I decided to bring this set because I was talking to Shardy, and that's immediately at that point I'm like, dude, you brought the wrong team.
Well, yeah, you don't. No one listens to Shardy. Why would you ever? That's the bad thing to do.
Anyway, the main thing with Nick is the opposite of some of the people we talked about this week, is he needs to preserve differential a little bit more. At that endgame, he basically sacked off Kyurem to Flygon, when Venusaur could have chewed Outrages for days. And there was literally, like, there was no other move Dan could have gone for. You can switch in Venusaur, it can take any hit from Flygon with no problems, and just synthesis back up and slowly whittle it down, etc. And Nick, you know, even when he wins relatively comfortably, like he beat John convincingly last week and it was only a 2-0 victory, he could potentially not make playoffs because he doesn't have enough differential, and I think he needs to be more aware of that. But, you know, just like previous weeks, Nick knows when to use his wall breakers and knows how to use them really well, in that they can break something down, force Dan to sack him on, and then as soon as Dan sacks something, Nick puts the matchup in his favour and uses that to get the win. He also played well around the Medicham. In the end, it was benefited a little bit by Dan over predicting a switch out, going for high jump kick, etc.
So, Nick, where's Aristotle? Like, come on, that was the best nickname ever, and you got rid of it. So it better be back next week. It's cool planning. Tailwind Skarmory. He did misplay with it. He could have switched into his Pangoro instead of the Kyurem Black, and then just gotten a lot of kills with Pangoro, because Dan had less switch-ins to Pangoro than he did Kyurem Black. Because then Tailwind was just kind of wasted, because Skarm died. He got 1 kill with Kyurem Black, which he probably would have gotten the kill anyway, due to Victini being slower. And he's going like, what the fuck is a wall? Nick, you have one of the best walls in Mega Venusaur, so...
And another good one is Skarmory.
Yeah, don't talk about what the fuck are walls. You've got walls. But then you also just straight wall breakers. And he thought through the late game well. Knew Dragalge was not specially defensive due to how much damage it was doing. Knew Kyurem could kill it. Knew he could kill with an Ice Beam specifically, so... It was really good playing, and like you said, yeah, he does have to think a little bit more about differential, but again, I will say this right now. If it's ever at all risky, and you think you could lose the game because you try to preserve differential, don't do it. Alright, so number 3, I have the San Francisco Arcaniners, and George, I think, planned very well this match. Choice Banded Ape, I love Infernape. It's so good, and Choice Banded Ape is one of my favorite sets. It just hits so damn hard. It was a really smart move to have Pain Split and Explosion. I actually caught Mono off guard because, you know, he wasn't expecting Explosion because of Pain Split. And Trick Scarf Gardevoir, we've seen Trick Scarf before. He didn't actually use the trick, but this time he used it to really good effect. Bronzong would have been a big problem, because Bronzong's always a problem, and just kind of crippled it immediately. And George really pulled himself back up after last week. He played this one very well. Great early game predictions. Removing the Bronzong as throw was really good. Made some strong middle ground plays throughout the match, and the explosion was really well timed. He made sure Garchomp couldn't get set up behind a sub, because he had seen sub on Garchomp. He's like, well, if Garchomp gets behind a sub, then I'm pretty much screwed, and I can't let that happen. So he knew how to preserve his mons for the late game, especially the Fortress, and then Choice Banded Ape. It just does good things. It kills the Garchomp with a Mach Punch. And basically, once he got rid of that Garchomp, he didn't really have anything to fear, because again, Azumarill, Whirlpool, Perish Trap kind of stuff, not really going to do too much damage. And you can tell, like he even said, once I saw it had Whirlpool, I was so relieved, because it wasn't offensive, and I didn't have to worry about it. And that's the kind of thing. He had a lot of pivoting on his team, so it's very hard to actually trap something with Azumarill. I think he just played this game really well, and he was out for blood this week, and he really made sure he got a big win. That last loss, he's just like, nope, not going to happen again. I'm winning from here on out. So, really good game by George.
I don't understand George's obsession just about with toxic spikes. It's not a criticism, it's something that he loves to do, and if it works for him, it works, but it's just something I don't particularly understand. The early predictions really set him up quite well. I mean, he and Mono were having a really good back and forth battle, but he got the edge because he just had a little bit more offensive power, and he was able to cripple Bronzong really effectively. Even though Bronzong was still used pretty well, the fact they didn't have leftovers just limited its longevity so much. And honestly, towards the late game, even though he knew the game was wrapped up, he still tried to preserve differential really, really well, and got a 4-0 win out of what was actually quite a close game, which was good to see.
Alright, so at number 2, we have the San Diego Chimchargers. So you can take MV.
The big thing we're both going to say about this week is MV, for the first few weeks of the season, just brought straight up ridiculous heat sets. Then the 1 week where he goes, I have a terrible matchup against Landorus, it just destroys my team. He doesn't bring any heat sets. Like, people are going to say Scarf Sneasel, Sugar Berry, Jirachi, etc. They're not heat sets, because in League format, that kind of stuff is super duper standard. And when someone has a threat which you just have nothing for, that's when you need to go and find something just mind-boggling that they won't see coming that can get rid of that threat. Instead, he tried to go the opposite route and said, well, if this thing destroys me, I need to try and bring some more standard things, but those things are quite see-through, and Lars, I mean, I don't know if he would have predicted Sugar Berry Jirachi. I can't remember from his commentary if he said that he did, but to most experienced League players, if someone brings in a Jirachi on your Landorus, you're predicting either Scarf or Sugar Berry, and if you know it's not Scarf, it's Sugar Berry. Like, there's no other reason they would bring it in.
Unless you're a man and you bluff a Scarf, like no one's business.
Unless you're top last week. So MV tried to make a couple of aggressive predictions with things like staying in with Ampharos against a Landorus, but Lars called out a lot of those and said, no, I'm just going to play safe. I'm going to play around MV's aggression because he knew it was coming. It's a hard thing to predict around, because if you stay in and he goes for Earth Power, you die. If you switch out into Togekiss and he goes to Sludge Wave, Togekiss dies, and that's one of your offensive checks to Landorus just gone. So no matter what, you were losing an offensive check if Lars made the right prediction. That's just how powerful Landorus is, and he didn't really have... I mean, very few things have anything that can straight up switch into Lando, but his predictions just weren't on point this week, and that cost him a lot of mons. But obviously, I mean, I still have him at number 2. He still played really, really well, and his prep was on point, which is interesting because he got 5-0'd, but I'm still saying that the team could have worked.
Envy's at number 2 because he's still one of the biggest threats in this league. And he did play super aggressively this game, and it didn't work out for him, and that is not a knock on Envy, because when you've got that bad team matchup and then you didn't have these like super weird sets, you got to try to play really aggressively, because listen, with the team matchup, it was like, it was a very good chance that he was going to lose, because, you know, Landorus just kind of shit all over his team. He played really aggressively, and when you play that aggressively, you're either going to win big or you're going to lose big, and he lost big, but he knew he needed to try to play aggressively to try to get into the game at any point. He might have overpredicted a little bit too much around the Landorus, but the second one, that was just, Lars not doing his calcs. So that would have actually worked out from had Lars done his calcs and realized, oh, I should switch out. So he needed to make those aggressive predictions, and it just didn't work out from this week. That's not to say that he's going to do poorly from this week on. He's still number 2, and I know that he's going to bounce back from this now that he doesn't have this kind of really terrible matchup. But the planning was good for any other kind of matchup. If it was like a decent matchup, the planning was fine. But for a bad matchup, that's when he's got to start playing the gimmicks. That plus really aggressive play just meant he lost big. And at number 1, of course, we have the Atlanta Hawluchas. And Fizz, I don't know how you did it, but that team builder was amazing. And I don't get, like, there's something about it that was just so good. He had very interesting prep this weavile. Defensive Volcanion for Weavile. That was pretty cool. It's not a great defensive check just because of its weakness to rocks. Conversion P2 is Shadow Ball. Now, I really like this because had Gothitelle switched into him. He still had Conversion. He had Shadow Ball, which meant that he could turn to a Ghost type, and Ghost types can't be trapped, so he could switch out. So that was really cool. Still able to use the Rhyperior really well. He kind of needs to. It's his only rock setter, and he needs rocks up. He kept up a really good amount of offensive momentum on his side, making really good middle ground plays, playing safe when he knew he needed to, especially like in on the Weavile. And I'm pretty sure he called the Wotmelberry, which is like, that's the kind of like gimmick that that's very hard to call. And he was like, nah, I don't want to go for U-turn in case he has the Wotmelberry natural gift, which is actually a very good read. And he used Zoroark well, which he's been using in past weeks. He's able to bait in moves and deal big damage, like against the Goodra, able to make sure it stays in and go for the Fire Blast. And he knew Talonflame was a big threat, but he was able to deal with it well with Thunder Wave, and then make sure that it was going to kill itself to recoil. Fizz played this one very well. He's using his transfers well. I mean, he's got Heliolisk again, which we saw last season that he loved to use. Granted, he doesn't have as good of support for it as he did last season. No sun, no sand. But still, he lost week 1, and now he's on a 4-game win streak, and it doesn't look like he's going to be slowing down anytime soon, so he's number 1 this week.
Fizz, if I see a team builder that is that disgusting again, I will drop you to number 16.
Disgusting?
I don't like being lied to in a team builder, and anything that has Burke is the best written along the bottom or whatever it was. I mean, that's just like
that's
such
just
an
that's
abhorrent
true.
lie.
No, that's just true. That's just true.
The conversion Shadow Ball was good not just for Gothitelle, but also for the Primeape. So if he's expecting an aggressive switch into Primeape, he can turn into a Ghost type, and all of a sudden your one weakness you're now immune to. Really interesting prep, and like it didn't end up coming into play at all in the battle because the 2 things that conversion was for weren't needed. He played around the Talonflame pretty well to get the chip damage that he knew he needed for it to kill itself to recoil. Late game, he went for Hyper Voice rather than Volt Switch with the Heliolisk, noticing that he needs Heliolisk to be in and not have taken rocks damage, so that Talonflame takes enough recoil from killing it that no matter what, it will die. Which means that even though he got the lucky power on Talonflame, that, you can't say it would have won in the game either way, because it would have led to Sucker Punch Mind Games and how much recoil Talonflame took from killing things. Now, you mentioned that he's using Zoroark well, but he's not particularly disguising it well. It's just for some reason no one seems to notice. He is using it in his prep well, what set to bring, what item to bring, and how to kill off the things he needs to kill off with it. He's just not really putting any thought into disguising it at all, and yet it somehow still works.
So that is going to wrap up the Week 5 Power Rankings for the GBA Season 6. If you have your own Power Rankings, please leave them down in the comment section below. Tell us who you think is the best right now. And it should be Fizz because he had the best team builder, but that's your own opinion. You got anything to say?
Just that I don't know who the best is, but I know that you're definitely the worst.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all we got for today, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye!